Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this week's PMI Friday webinar, Making Your Strategy Work for You with Des Kelly. My name is Susanna Clark, and I'm going to be facilitating the session today, which includes running the Q&A desk and which we'll be using throughout the presentation. The Q&A button you can find on your Zoom control panel, so please think of great questions, keep them coming, and I'll put them to Des during the webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded and we will send you a link via email early next week to the full recording. That has both the audio and the presentation you're going to see today. As usual, we are also broadcasting live on Facebook and on LinkedIn. So to those joining us on these live streams, we welcome you. To be able to participate in polls, receive the recording via email, and make suggestions for future topics, please do register on our upcoming webinar schedule at pmi.co.uk/webinars, and you'll find the full schedule of events there. Finally, from me before we get underway, after the webinar, we'll send all registered participants a short Voice of the Customer survey. We'd be really grateful for your feedback, as well as any suggestions for future topics for the PMI Friday webinars that you'd like us to cover. On that note, I will hand over to Des. Thank you.
Thank you, Suze. Welcome, everybody. Many people from around different time zones in the world. So for whatever time it is for you, for wherever you are, a very warm welcome. So this afternoon, we're going to be looking at strategy and how it can be used to help your businesses. So what we're going to be covering this afternoon. So first thing we'll cover is actually just looking at what is strategy and look at some of the core tools and some of the techniques that you can consider when you're creating and deploying your strategy. When we come to deploying your strategy, we're looking at how we will create a shared vision and a community focused on delivery of that strategy. And then looking at the importance of how setting that clear direction, that very clear direction, which is unambiguous, that will allow for the involvement and motivation of everybody in your organization. So that's what we should be looking for. Before we get too far into the presentation, now, I'd like to glean some data from you guys, if it's at all possible. So on the screen now, you'll see a poll coming up. So this is a very simple question. The poll will be launched by Sue in a very brief moment. 4 questions I want to ask, or 4 potential answers to 1 question. So first of all, what is the status of your strategy in your organization? And answer 1 is we have a 5-year or longer strategy with very clear objectives. Answer 2 is we have a 1 to 3 year strategy with clear objectives. 3 is we have an agile strategy, which is very dynamic and changes as we need. Or answer 4 could potentially be, we do not have a strategy that I'm aware of. Suze.
So that is launched. Thank you for those who've already started to post your or choose your options. We had some clear leaders at the beginning, which is the top 2 answers, answer 1 and answer 2. Most people have landed there at the moment. We've got a few people also saying they have an agile strategy that's dynamic. Really interested to understand more about that. If you have any comments about that, please do add them into the Q&A, and we'd like to discuss that further. And at the moment, just 1 person who says we do not have a strategy that I'm aware of. So I'm just going to end that polling right now. So if you still would like to post your answer, please do. And then I will share the results so everyone can see them. So there we have it, a clear leader we have a 5-year or longer strategy with clear objectives. And then right behind that is that we have a 1 to 3 year strategy with clear objectives.
That's excellent. Okay, that's really very, very good. So in excess of 85% of you guys that are on the stream today have a 1 to 3 year or 5 year strategy, which is really very, very good. So
and Des,
yes,
just before you go off, I've got an interesting question just come in, which is it normal to have a strategy but without clear objectives?
Is it normal? It's common and not very helpful.
Indeed.
Is what I would say. It is common. And actually, the person who asked that question, if you could pop back in and out onto the questions and answers as we go through this. As I start to actually pull up certain dimensions and aspects of the of what a strategy is and how it gets deployed, let's do some cross checks, see whether or not that will help maybe clarify some points for you on that. So great, Sue, on that one. Really very, very good.
Thank you.
Super.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's set the context for the strategy first then, shall we? You will have seen me use this on previous webinars, and it's a very simple thing because I just want to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. So this was our little graphic that we use for the roles of top managers. And as you will remember, those that have been on our previous webinars, it's about leading the system on the right-hand side, understanding whether the system is satisfying the customer needs or whether it needs changing, and if it needs changing, sponsoring projects that will bring around that change. And then the other role is to actually manage the process, deliver and maintain, standardize, maintain. And so that's the role of the leader. Now we have a worded version of that. So what we expect the roles of leaders to do is to understand the needs and expectations of the customer and design a system that will deliver this. That's effectively setting the aim. For those that joined Barry on his webinar last week, you will remember he referred to one of the damaging aspects of people not really understanding what the purpose or aim of their system was. And this becomes a really important thing to remember as we go. Then we should be continually monitoring the performance of our system and sponsor projects that will change or improve the system in line with changing customer needs and expectations. That's actually measuring where we are, having our finger on the pulse, understanding the dynamics of both the business and the world in which that business operates. And then finally, managing the day-to-day operations of the system to maintain the best balance of efficiency, effectiveness, and flexibility. That's just having the balance to focus. So,
Des, sorry.
Suze.
That's okay. Just before we go into the next poll, I've been asked a great question, and I just thought actually for everybody on this webinar today, it would be a useful question for you to answer. So the question is, I'm interested to understand, what does organization mean? Does it mean company or department or team? Which level are we talking about?
Well, actually, it can relate to all three. So at a big organization, if you're a multinational, it could be an organization. The organization of that big multinational will be how they interact across the various boundaries and borders. It could be an entity within that bigger organization, and how are they organized. And you can have a strategy for one and then a deployed strategy set down for the next. Most organizations have functions or departments within it. And I would say that's a subset of the organization. That help? That's
great. Thanks, Des.
Super. Okay. So we're going to run another poll then in that case, just this one. The excellent poll last time, which showed that 85% of the people on this webinar actually have a strategy of some length. So in your organization, to what degree is strategy deployed? Now, there's one thing having a strategy, and there's another thing having it deployed. So the four answers here are: the strategy is known and understood mainly by the executive team. 2, the strategy is known and understood mainly by the senior managers. 3, is the strategy is known and understood by most people in the organization. We don't have a strategy. Is 4. So would you like to have a poll for that?
Yeah, so that poll has been launched and everyone's joining in, which is great to see. At the moment, we're neck and neck on answers 2 and answer 3, which is fantastic. Yeah. Well, fantastic that we've got number 3 in there. It's always good to see. What's also good to see is that at the moment, we don't have anybody saying that we don't have a strategy. So that is music.
It is music, but I think it might be conditioned by the type of people we're going to have on our webinar, Suze, because I definitely walk into organizations, as I think you do, and there is no obvious or clear strategy as to where they're going to go to. So, so I think that's probably indicative of the population we have on our webinar.
So I'm just going to bring that to a close, that poll. So if you just haven't cast your vote already, if you'd like to make your decision, and then I will draw that to a close. and share the results so that everybody could see that. So at the end of that, 50% of the people say that strategy is known and understood mainly by senior managers.
Okay, so that's the lead on that one. So mainly by senior managers. That's right. There's the 11% who say that you feel it's mainly understood by the executive team. The inference I'm going to take from that then is for you guys, everybody else in the organization is pretty blind to what the strategy may be, or at least the details of what the strategy may be. The strategy is known and understood by mainly senior managers. Now, how well is it understood by the rest of the organization? And that's one of the things that we want to focus on for the balance of the presentation. So that's really interesting. So it's really very, very interesting.
So before we go on, I've got a question actually that relates to the previous poll, and in particular the question about a strategy being agile. And they'd like to they're putting it in the context of the COVID situation, which we're all in at the moment. And the question they have is, in this current situation, can a strategy be made resilient and agile to fit the unfolding world?
Yeah, that's a really, really profound question. It's a great question. So can it be agile? So I think agile, let's give the operational definition of agile from how we put the context, the question in its context. And that was that you are picking up and responding to what's happening in the world around you. And you're analyzing what's happening in the world around you, and you are responding to it. Now, it can be, I think, resilient, but there is a risk, is that if you keep on changing your direction, your constancy of purpose, you could end up getting dizzy and lost. And so it requires a particular skill to maintain a focus on what you're doing. If you keep on changing what you're about, then it's going to be very hard for the organization to respond. I think how you respond to the world can be stable and predictable at the same time, though.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for your involvement in the poll.
Super. Thanks, Suze. Okay, so let's move on by actually, let's just get an agreement as to what a strategy is. So a little bit of digging around, you'll find many papers on strategy. There are more papers written on strategy than you can shake a stick at. Now that can be a good thing or it can be bad. But Johnson and Scholes define strategy as the direction and scope of an organization over the longer term, which will achieve advantage for the organization through its configuration of resources, that's the organization, within a challenging environment to meet the needs of markets and to fulfill stakeholder expectations. Rather large, but take out the key words in that: direction, scope, long-term, advantage, resources, environment, markets, stakeholders. They're key words that you're finding there. Chandler defines strategy as this: the determination of the basic long-term goals of an enterprise and the adoption of courses of action and allocation of resources necessary to carry out these goals. We have a slightly abridged version of it, and really, strategy is all about making deliberate choices. Strategy is about making deliberate choices about what it is we're going to do. But I'd like to stress also, it's also, and possibly more importantly, about what we're not going to do. For every organization that's represented on today's webinar, you will have more things that you could do than you can do. And it's critically important that you identify what the vital few things are and you focus upon those and deliver those robustly and cleanly. And interestingly, a graphic in there where Sun Tzu says, the strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory, whilst tactics without a strategy is the noise before the defeat. Interesting, and that goes back some years. So what is strategy then? So strategy is, where is the business trying to get to in the long term? That's the strategic direction. Which markets should a business compete in, and what kind of activities are involved in those markets? How will the business perform better than its competition in those markets that it's elected to enter into? Really critically, what are the resources the skills, the assets, the finance, relationships, technical competencies, facilities, and carry on with those sort of things that are going to be required for you to organize yourself and to be able to compete. Very importantly, strategy is about understanding what are the external environmental factors that affect the business and that will influence how it will be able to compete in the years coming forward. What are the values and the expectations of the stakeholders? So how do they want the business to be? How do they want it to be seen? How do they want their reflection through society, through their involvement with that business? Now, there are 3 phases to strategy, and this is a nice, simple little model. The first of them is strategic analysis. Strategic analysis, we're going to look at what that means in a moment. Then strategic choice. Then strategy implementation. So analysis, strategic choice, and implementation. And we're going to look at those in a little bit more detail. But before I do that, one of the things I would like to stress is that the processes that will carry out the strategic analysis, strategic choice, and strategy implementation. And notice I emphasize the words, the processes should be stored in the top right-hand side of your system map in your business system. Somewhere in there, you should have a process of strategy, development, and deployment. So that's going to take me to another poll right now, because we've talked about strategic analysis. And one of the things I want to understand is, to what extent does your organization use market analysis for the development of the aiding of development of your strategy? So answer 1 is we tend not to study the market too much. We study some aspects of the market, but not all, is answer 2. We study the market, but the information is not shared with the organization. We study the market and the information is shared throughout the organization. And answer 5 could be, I don't know, because you're not in the right environment. I don't know if we study the market formally at all. So that vote is open.
Yeah, that poll's launched, and it set off with a leader for answer 4, which is obviously we study the market, the information is shared throughout the organisation. Catching up on that now is that we do study the market, but the information is not shared with the organisation. And in fact, that has now just taken over as leader.
Okay.
We have obviously got people who are also saying that we do study some aspects. Some people who don't know. So assuming that they don't know, because even if they do actually do some study, that isn't shared.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So
very good.
Just coming to the end of that now. So again, if you haven't yet selected your vote, please do, and then I will share the results with everybody. Thank you.
Very good. So then, Suze, what's the results there then?
So the final result is, as you can see, so we study the market, but the information is not shared with the organisation. So that's 44% of the vote says that, compared to 36% who say that we study the market and the information is shared throughout the organisation. We've got a little on we study some aspects, but not all, and a few on I don't know if we formally study the market.
Okay. So that's interesting. That's really interesting. So I hopefully are going to emphasize over the next 10 minutes or so why it's actually really important to truly understand your market, but allow the organization to understand the market and why you might be taking the actions that you have elected to take. So first thing to do is let's bring back our model of the 3 phases of strategy. And I'm going to focus on strategic analysis. So strategic analysis, this is all about analyzing the strength of the business's position or the organization's position and understanding the important external factors that may influence that position. It's about looking outside of the organization to make sure that you're aware of the world and the environment that you are in. So we have our system map, and remember that we said that the processes by which strategy, analysis, deployment, etc. are enacted are held in those two orange boxes on the top. And what we want to do now then is to understand the environment in which our organization is operating. So the organization operates within something we refer to as a primary environment. Now, the primary environment is an environment best defined as it can impact upon us. So, for example, our competitor might do something which will impact upon us, but equally, we can do something that can impact upon them. So it's a two-way street. So that could be the interaction between what suppliers are doing, what the market, the customers are doing locally, how you can sell, all those sorts of things that can influence, you can influence, but also will influence you. So we need to have a way of understanding the primary environment. There's another environment which we're interested in, which is the macro environment. Now, the macro environment, as you can see from the model, is a one-way transition. It can affect our organization, but our organization will struggle to influence it. And we are living through one of the most strong representations of that at this moment in time. COVID-19 is impacting almost every organization throughout the whole world, but the organizations themselves can do little to influence it, but they need to understand the impact of it and how it's playing against their organization and how your organization will respond to that stimulus from the macro environment. So we're going to look at how we can get some understanding and some knowledge about these environments. So remembering then that strategic analysis is about the analyzing the strength of the business or the organization's position and understanding all the important external factors that will influence it. So there's our graphic now sat in the middle of that strategic analysis sphere. So the process of strategic analysis can be assisted by a few management tools. Now, most people who've been through college or university, or even just maybe some basic courses in marketing, will have come across all of the models I'm going to show you. The thing they may not have thoroughly covered off is how these models work together. So the first one is going to be PESTEL. Now, that's a technique for understanding parts of the environment that your organization is operating in. Then we've got Porter's 5 forces model. That's another technique for identifying the forces that are impacting upon the business that will affect the organization's level of competition and strength in a market. And then finally, a tool which probably every single person knows, the SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, this is just a useful summary model that allows us to express, in a simple term, a collection of our gathered knowledge. So I'm going to look at those in a different way. So if we look at this, there's our marketplace study model, and we use Porter's 5 forces analysis to study the primary environment. And we use PESTEL analysis to understand the macro environment. We'll spend just a little bit of time having a little dig around each of those models. So there's Porter's 5 forces models. I'm sure many of you will have been introduced to that throughout your career. The elements of threats of new entrants to your marketplace, rivalry among the existing competitors, bargaining power of the buyers, bargaining power of the suppliers, and the threat of substitute products. They can be more detailed if you wish, and you can study this, and you'll find many people have written about Porter's models and added to it. So I'm not going to go through all the detail on that. You've got the slides when it comes to you. But if you look at the detail behind that, you could probably add things in for yourself. But it's making sure that we have had the ability and we've got the processes to both study and learn about what's happening in that macro environment and translating that into theories about how we should respond. So that's the model for the two-way influence, which is the macro environment. The analysis tool that is used for the one-way environment, the macro environment, is PESTEL. And that stands for political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal. When I first came across this model a number of years ago, it was just simply known as PEST. But the environmental spun out of the social and the technological. So we've got other things now. So it's now known as PESTEL model. And again, not going to go through the detail on that, but you can be able to read it.
Quick question, Des. And the question is possibly particularly related to this particular model. It says, we don't have a strategy team in our organisation. So do you have any advice on where this sort of work would sit? You know, would it be in, for instance, the legal department, etc., responsible for looking at that, and then all of that coming together? How would you suggest that works?
I think it's not important where it sits. I think it's really important as what it does and how it's located in the business processes. Someone needs to undertake it. Now, it might well be that the Porter's model, if I look at the Porter's model going back there, it might well be that you have the sales team that are doing the work that understands the customers. You might have the supplier team that are understanding the suppliers. You might have the engineering team looking at threats of new products and threats of new entrants. So it doesn't really matter where it's done, as long as it is, and it is done comprehensively with the mindset of understanding and learning about the marketplace. So if you don't have a strategy department, not a big problem at all, in my view, as long as you have a process that will enable you to understand and analyze those dimensions of the actual model itself. So to make sure that you have the ability to understand the primary environment. Does that hopefully answer the question, Suze?
I think that's a great answer. Thanks, Des.
Right, okay. So that's the PESTEL model. Now, so we've got the Porter's model that will look at the primary environment, and PESTEL looks at the macro environment. But all of the data we generate from that in some way needs to be summarized so that it can be presented coherently and logically to the organization to enable the organization to collectively develop theories about how it is going to respond to that environmental condition. One of the tools we use for that is the SWOT analysis. Now, the SWOT analysis has been around for decades and decades. However, when we come to creating a strategy, we can add certain things to it which make it helpful. So the presentation you got in front of you is a SWOT analysis, and if I now take the vertical column, the green vertical column, the strengths and opportunities, these are the things that are helpful, that are in our environment, that will help us achieve delivering our objectives to the marketplace. And in the red column, the weaknesses and threats, those are the things that are harmful, the things that are pushing against our ability to successfully deliver the strategy. And if you take them then at a lateral level, we've got the internal view. The strengths and weaknesses are an internal view of how we feel we are weak or we are strong. The opportunities and threats is the external view. And it is the data and knowledge that came from the Porter's and PESTEL analysis from our primary environment and our macro environment, which feeds the knowledge that goes into there. So to understand the data generated from the Porter's 5 forces model and the PESTEL analysis, we use them to populate the opportunities and threats element of our external view on the SWOT analysis. So that's how we take that model and we put it in place. So that's just an explanation of 3 relatively common tools that are used to help us understand the world in which our organization is operating in, and allows us to collect that knowledge so it can be shared so everyone can have a global view as to what the organization is facing. So having done that, we use the knowledge and the data we have from that to allow the leaders to generate theories that will allow them to set the direction they need to create the magnetic north that everybody else is going to align to. We need the leadership team to set the direction, to get something that pulls. So you often hear people call about it as a lighthouse. So the idea being is that most organizations today, every employee is doing their very, very best to do the best for that organization. And sometimes those very best activities are actually creating tension. They're pulling against each other. They're causing frustration. They're causing energy to be lost or dissipated because they're competing. So what we want that magnetic north to do is to get everybody at least turning around and facing all in the same direction. And if we can get everybody facing in the same direction and then give coherent and logical instructions and explanations of the tasks and actions we're going to undertake, we can get everybody moving all in the same direction. When you've got everybody aligned and all moving in the same direction, your organization has taken on an energy and a power that will sustain you in the future and even get you to places we would never believe possible. Suze, there's a question, I believe.
There is, very much related to the slide that you're on at the moment and what you're saying currently. And the question is, does everyone in an organization have to know the strategy at the high level? Or really, is it enough for them just to understand the implication or the implementation of the strategy in their day-to-day work or tasks?
Well, in my view, it's important that they actually understand why they are undertaking an action. If you are left undertaking an action with no clear line of sight as to why you're being asked to do this, it may reduce your energy and your motivation and your desire to see that task through, particularly when the tasks get difficult. If you cannot see the reason for doing something, and this happens in many organizations, if you cannot see the reason for doing something, it becomes almost a nonsense. Why am I doing this? And you don't want anybody in the organization shaking their head saying, why am I doing this? So I think it's actually quite important that in a coherent way and in a way that is helpful to the organization, we communicate and we involve them in not necessarily setting the direction. I don't think that's the responsibility of everybody in the organization, but allowing them to respond to how the organization will set about and embark upon the direction. So I think it's really important that they do understand not only what they're going to do, but why they are doing it.
Indeed. And then one other question that's just come in. In your opinion, Des, do you think silo working or silo thinking stops the organization working towards the magnetic north?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. Yes, it most certainly does. And I think actually possibly silo thinking may often be a consequence of not having a clearly articulated magnetic north, because everybody thinks that, well, it's the most important thing is my department, when actually there needs to be a bigger organizational objective that is clearly articulated and then passed down to the workforce and to people working in the organization so that they can actually respond and help deliver the strategic objective. So yes, I think that's I think it was Mark said that made that question, was it? Yeah. So Mark, yes, I think it does. Okay.
Thanks, Ed, and thank you all for your questions.
Okay, so keep the questions coming, and if there's anything in here that jars with you, or indeed if you have some experiential learning that says that's a really good idea, then get into the question and answer and let us know, because we can learn as much from your input as we can give to you as well. So let's share that if we can. So a couple of other things then. Now let's look about deploying the strategy. Once we've got this wonderful strategy that all of the senior leaders sat around the table are excited about, they're convinced it will respond to the marketplace requirements, it will take their business forward, it will deliver the goals and the desires of the stakeholders, then how do we get the organization to respond to that, to undertake the actions that are required to deliver that very strategy? So there's a couple of tools around. There's one that we're going to talk about, and I'm just going to focus on one of them at the moment, and it is just one of them, but many of you will have heard of HOSHIN KANRI, or you may have heard it referred to as policy deployment, goal deployment, strategy deployment. One of the techniques is known as HOSHIN KANRI. Now for HOSHIN KANRI, it's just another one of those Japanese words, but HOSHIN, as you can see on the screen, gives you a description of it. The reason I want to say this is because it's quite useful. Ho is direction, shin is actually needle, kan is controlling or channeling, and ri is reason or logic. So direction, needle, control, logic. And so the summary of that could be compass, needle management, direction management. That's all it is, direction management. So that's what HOSHIN KANRI is about. The classic HOSHIN process is 7 steps, as you can see on the screen. The first 3 are about developing the strategy. The next group are about deploying the strategy. Now, if I go back to our early model, the 3 phases of the strategy, the 2 spheres that are related here are strategic choice, the sphere of strategic choice. What are the things that we are going to do? What are the things that we're not? And then the other sphere is strategy implementation, getting it across the organization. So we need to be looking about why would that be. So just a quick coalition of models then in that case. There's our 3-phase strategic model. The strategic model itself can be aligned in a linear fashion, where we have the understand the market or strategic analysis at the top, then strategic choice and strategy implementation. One thing I'm going to stress at this point here, though, is that the purpose of doing the market survey and the understanding the market is so that the leadership team can develop theories about how they can respond. It is in effect the study element of plan, do, study, act. So then there needs to be some response to sort of say, well, let's put the plan together in doing that. So it's about developing theories. Now, if I take our HOSHIN model, I can align it to this, and it falls out on the left-hand side. Now, this is one thing I just want to stress to most people, is that the HOSHIN planning is a really useful thing, but it does assume that the organization has a detailed understanding of the world in which it's operating and the strengths and weaknesses it has operating within that world. Okay. The strategy deployment, then, to use the other little models that we've got, it's about creating the magnetic north and getting everyone not only to face in the same direction, but actually to walk and to power forward in that same direction. So that's the coalition of strategy models pulled together. Let's have a look at strategy deployment now. So many of you will have heard of vision and mission statements. Interesting things, vision and mission statements. I'll touch a little bit on them in a moment. They need to be clear, compelling, and challenging, and must have a clear finishing line. The vision and mission may give rise to those strategic choices. So these things that we are going to do and the things that we're not. Now, those strategic choices must be realistic, normally have a time span of about 2 to 5 years. They must have a clear point or an objective to them. They must be absolutely clear about what they're doing. So they must have stated for them end goal objectives. Now, these will be the key milestones. This will be the things that we will state as being, when we get to here, we will know we have been successful. If you don't have those things, you will never know whether you've arrived. So the end goal objectives are clear. We need to have what choices, what are the things we're going to be doing, and what is the objective of doing that? What will it look like when we get there? And then we need to state what are the actions or what are the means that we will deploy to get to that place. So for each key objective, we must state the actions that we're taking to get to that place. So that's a very structured way of looking at it. And actually our HOSHIN process will help us do that if we follow it. So on the first part of that, let's have a quick look at some notes on vision and mission statements. This is one of those things where you're either for them or you're not. They can be a little bit, we say in the UK, a bit Marmite. So you either like it or you don't. But I'm just going to give you a view of vision and mission statements. So vision is something that defines the way the organization or enterprise will look in the future. It's a long-term view, sometimes describing how the organization would like the world in which it's operating I'd like the world to look like this. And we've got a couple of examples which we'll touch on in a little while. So an example I'm going to use now, this is not one that's created by me, but I found it useful. A charity working with the poor across the world might have a statement that reads, a world without poverty. And that's the vision. The vision for that organization is creating a world without poverty. And then the mission statement will define the fundamental purpose of the organization or the enterprise. It will describe it succinctly. It will say why it exists and what it's going to do to achieve its vision. Sometimes sets out a picture for the organization's future. And the mission statement really sort of suggests this is what we do. So if I return to that charity, a world without poverty is their vision, their current mission would be job training for the homeless and unemployed. And that's what they're doing. Now, I can imagine 50% of you are feeling, oh, that doesn't feel right. And 50% of you are probably saying, yeah, that's okay. So something to be aware of. Our research shows that many organizations invert vision and mission and vision. And we posed ourselves the question, does that matter? And we came to the conclusion, well, in our view, no, not really. As long as you appreciate what it was they were trying to infer, and did they set the magnetic north? And it's fair to say many organizations perform really well without either. So that's something to be aware of. So now let's have a look at the deployed objectives. So deployed objectives, this is the means to the end. So many of you will be familiar with our 3-question model from Nolan and Provis. 3 questions: what are we trying to accomplish? How will we know that any change is an improvement? And then what changes can we make that will deliver that improvement? Now, we could have, as one of our strategic choices, as what are we trying to accomplish is, I'll give you an example here, to be seen as the world's most environmentally advanced organization. That becomes the end goal. That becomes the end goal. But we need to have a way of measuring that. How will we know when we've got to that place? And now we can start to decide what are the things that we could do, for what changes can we bring around that might do that. Now, at an organization, for each of the end goals, you might have 1, 2, maybe even 3 things you could do that would help resolve that end goal. So in this case here, for this one, wanting to be the world's most environmentally advanced corporation, they're going to increase the volume of sales of environmentally protective substances or products, environmentally protective products, to at least 30% of the total sales. They need now to also have a measure for that, because how will you know that you've achieved that? So we have this little list of things we do: set the goal and a measure, understand the means and a measure. So that's goal, measure, means, measure. Suze.
Couple of questions. The first question, so in my organization, it's encouraged to have a vision for each sub-organization. So one for HR, one for procurement, one for IT. And what's your view on that?
My view on that, actually, I'm going to be quite bold here. I think that's massively suboptimal. You are part of a bigger organization. It is the organization's vision that you should be focused on. There cannot be competing visions, in my view. I don't believe they're helpful. Where I've seen them, they're most certainly not helpful, because it suggests that HR is operating on its own vision. Now, unless you can articulate a collection of visions which all will ultimately take to that point, then frankly, it was an exercise I don't feel was worthy of doing. I think it would be better to understand how the actions that we can take to deliver that, as opposed to saying fractionally organization, say we're all going in different directions. So my view is, it is an unnecessary complexity to have departmental visions. I don't think it adds value.
Okay, thank you. And another question, and of course, I'm sure that this depends upon the size of the organisation. So let's assume that we've all agreed it depends. But do you have any thoughts on a realistic number of KPIs at the top level for a company to have in terms of cascading to ensure successful implementation?
Right, so if you take it right to the highest level, so the very first level of questioning, as you can imagine, as it goes down the organization, it cascades out. So we try to restrict organizations that we're working with to maybe 4 to 6. And I'll explain the reason why that will be at this moment, in a few moments. Because, and do remember this, that developing a strategy is not writing down all the things you can do. It's writing down the things that you must do as a priority, sorting out the vital few and agreeing on what those vital few are, having a theory about how those vital few will address the needs of the organization in the future, and robustly and completely delivering those. The power of leadership, and this is the most difficult factor for a leader, is agreeing what it is you're not going to be doing. Weak leaders will try to do everything, and they'll diffuse the energy, they'll lose the motivation, they'll confuse the organization. Be clear about what it is you're trying to accomplish. Get down to the vital few, and the vital few may number somewhere between 4 and 6. It depends on how well you organize, but that would be my view.
Thanks, Des, and thanks again for your questions.
Great. Okay, so goal deployment then in that case. Here's a little example of how goal deployment, key goal deployment could work. And this is where I will express how it could be, why you should limit the number of things you've got. So the executive, for example, will identify that what the end goal is going to be. And there might be 2 or 3 things that they've got that they want to line up. So being recognized as the environmentally responsible business, that's the one. So again, I'm picking on this theme. So the means by which they're going to do that is to increase sales of environmentally sensitive products. Now, that's the means to the end at an executive level. When I come down a level, what we actually do, the means, which was communicated by the executive, is picked up by the next level down as being their end goal. And they will then go away and work out what's the means by which they will do that. So let's have a little look at this one here. It could well be that you've got sales departments, you've got a marketing department, you've got an engineering department, a research department, a HR department, an IT department. Increasing sales of environmentally sensitive products for the research and development, there might be a different thing that they're going to do to the sales department. So they might put more research energy into environmentally sensitive products. The sales department might work to increase sales and to find routes to market for those very products. The marketing team likewise. So what are they doing to actually achieve that? And then deployed down again, we take the means from the level up and we put it to the one down. So the department senior management got their end goal, which came from the means of the exec. They generate their means, and then the department staff take that on as being their objective, and they will come up with a means by which that has got to be delivered. So that's how it gets deployed, and it takes a bit of a tuning in to get to a place where you can see that. So let's have a quick look at it again in a slightly different way. So goal deployment is something like this. What are we trying to accomplish is expressed by the executive. How changes do the executive want to see brought to the organization is the third question in that model. Both of those things need to be measured. At the next level down, the 3-question model becomes active again. So what we're now trying to accomplish is the achievement of the means. So that becomes the end goal for the next level down. So notice on this one then how the one on the left becomes the same as the one on the right. The means to achieve the goal from the supervisory level above is repeated as the end goal for the next level in the organization. And then that will progress to something like this. Just a word of caution, for those of you who are going to start out doing this this year, you might only get to level 1 in year 1. Don't try to do the whole organization in a couple of years. You won't have the capability to do it. One important question to ask, though, is really important question to consider. Is this objective, so accelerating the introduction of chrome-free products, for example, will that respond and help to achieve that goal? If the answer is no, then that is not the thing to do. We're getting close to the end. So if you've got any other questions or any other statements you'd like to make, then please bring it up. But once we've got that, many of you will have heard of a subject called catchball. So the establishment of the means to achieve the goal or objective is not a one-way transmission from the senior managers. It is not a, you will do this, and they go off and do it. It is a reciprocal process between one level and the next until an acceptable action is agreed upon. It's effectively PDSA in action. And as you can see from the graphic there, it motivates from one area, if it comes back from the lower means, upper level, and we can keep going around that. This is one of the most complicated things about strategy deployment, and certainly within HOSHIN deployment, it's one of the most difficult things for the organization, both to understand and then to execute. So that's sometimes referred to as catchball. So when we pull all this together and we look at the marketplace, we understand the risks and opportunities, we can develop theories about where we're going to go, what are the things that we are going to be doing. We can now express those in a clear and coherent way that allows other people in the organization to understand what it is the business is doing. So right to that earlier leading question, should you allow everybody in the organization to know? If they can see this model cascaded through them, then they will know. And then their means, the actions that they're taking will have meaning, will have power that you wouldn't otherwise have. The process benefits from doing this and looking at it this way are, remember, we've got the strategic focus on the vital few areas that the business needs to improve. So that's why you only end up with 4 to 6 key strategic goals that you're going for. So you don't overwhelm the organization. Remember that word, those few words, the vital few. There's lots you can do. You've got to work out what are the things that you must do. Leadership of this has to be evident at all levels. If people working down in the organization do not believe that the leaders care about what the things that they are doing, they will not do them optimally. So we've got to make sure they see that. Employees are involved in setting targets, ideally, identifying improvement initiatives, and running the progress reviews. Every employee understands the goals of the organization and has a clear view of their role and objectives, aligns the resources of the organization with the objectives and the measures to all the organizational goals at all levels. There has to be clear accountability. We need to know who is going to do what. And this will support and promote the consideration of an organization as a system rather than, and congratulations to the, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name of the questioner who says, does this enable, does silo thinking cause a problem? This process supports and promotes the consideration of system thinking rather than silo thinking. So that was a very intuitive observation for our viewer from that earlier question. So a quick summary then on what we've talked about. Strategy is all about making deliberate choices on what to do, and possibly more importantly, what it is you're not going to do. The most difficult job of a senior leader is stopping things that you don't need to do. Strategy is a process just like any other work process we have in our organizations, and should be understood and should be followed. Doesn't necessarily, as we discussed earlier, doesn't necessarily have to be carried out by a particular department. It can be carried out by a number of people, as long as someone is managing the process of strategy development and strategy deployment. There are 3 phases to any strategy: strategic analysis, establishing the strategic choices, and then the strategy deployment throughout the organization. The strategy is the thing that sets the true north for the organization, the thing that pulls everybody around, gives them the direction in which they are to look and to align to. As we've discussed, vision and mission, they're helpful, but not essential. But for your organization to deliver the strategy optimally, it will be important. I'm going to say not just important, essential, to ensure that that strategy is deployed throughout the organization, so that every function at all levels has an insight as to why the organization is traveling in the direction it is, and the actions it is taken, or how they will help in delivering that. And remember that strategies respond to the changing world in which our organizations operate. Only by understanding the environment and developing, testing, and deploying theories about how we should respond will our organization survive and prosper in the future. Suze, I think that's me about finished on that one.
Thank you very much, Des, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Just before we finish, we wanted to let you know that new for autumn 2020, if you or any of your colleagues enroll on one of our PMI public Lean, Six Sigma Green, Black or Master Black Belt courses, then what we're doing is we're going to send you an Apple iPad, and that's really about equipping you for the best virtual experience that you can have. So the aim is to give you access to additional equipment that you can use during the training, so you've got more than one screen available. That really helps the learning experience because you can use different screens for different jobs during your training. And then once you finish your training with us, you can keep it. Finally, I think just to remind everybody, please do look out for our Voice the Customer survey. You'll receive this from us, and we're really, really grateful for your feedback. It helps us to learn, of course, to improve naturally, but also those suggestions that you have for future topics are absolutely what we're paying attention to and what we're building our schedule of future topics around. So that really brings us to the end of today's webinar. So on behalf of PMI, on behalf of Des, thank you very much for joining us. Wish you all a very safe and a very relaxing weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.